This is the Thrive Podcast with Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. And now, Pastor Fred Jeff Smith.
Hello. Welcome to the Thrive Podcast with the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. I'm Fred Jeff Smith, pastor of Shiloh, and I'm very happy that you have taken the time to either download and listen to this podcast or view it on YouTube. We are available 5 days a week on iTunes. We're available once a week, this drop, on YouTube. We are grateful to those who take the time to listen, and we invite you to share with us your thoughts about the podcast, your concerns about the podcast, any questions that might arise from the podcast. You can contact me directly at fredjeffsmith@cox.net, FredJeffSmith at cox.net. I'd be more than happy to hear from you. I'm very happy today to have a young man that I have grown to love and appreciate and think is one of the most talented and bright young men that I have come across in a very long time, Mr. Terrance Turner, who runs the audio video ministry here for Shiloh. He is the producer of this Thrive podcast, and I just think that he's a young man with tremendous talent and a limitless future. Terrance, thank you for taking the time to come and share with us today on the Thrive podcast.
I'm almost speechless. You know, you just bring me out so well. Like, I need to live up to a lot of this stuff.
Well, trust me, you already have, or else I wouldn't have said it. You fall into a category with one or two others, I believe, Reverend Demetria Jones-Smith and Reverend Dale Flowers being the other two. You are the third multiple guest that we have had here on the Thrive podcast. In fact, it was just about a year ago that you were here the last time, and we discussed audio video ministry, your work with Mad Game Entertainment, and some other things that were going on. What's been going on in the last year since you were last on?
A lot. You keep me busy. This year, though, I actually launched a new television program with Kenyatta Collins, who she does the video announcements here at Shiloh.
Yes, she does.
But it's more like a news program. I've produced other programs before, more lighthearted kind of comedy. This is more of a community-based news kind of program. So really been getting some good feedback with that. Real proud of that program. Let me see. We put out a magazine called Ambition.
Yes.
Got good feedback from that. We're gearing up to, we kind of put it out to kind of like test the waters, and now we're going to actually put it on a schedule now to where it'll come out like quarterly. So we've been working on that and just staying busy around here.
Do you think people read, Terrance? I'm just picking up on the magazine piece. I find that a lot of people today, and that's not meant as a slam, it's not meant as an insult, just meant as an observation of fact. I find that a lot of people don't read too much anymore. Don't read the daily newspaper, don't read news periodicals. Even something as minute as the Sunday worship folder that we spend a lot of time putting together on a weekly basis, filled with information about what's going on at the church, upcoming events at the church, and invariably I'll have people say, well, now tell me what's going on at the church. And I say, well, it was in the worship folder. Oh, well, I don't read that. So I'm just from your observation, you're a younger man than I am. Do you think people read anymore?
I think it's starting to come back around. The saying is there's nothing new under the sun. And I think people are starting to come back around to reading. It's funny, the only reason I actually launched the magazine is because I was fed up with the magazines that are here in Baton Rouge. Mm-hmm. I felt like it's just a big ad magazine. Like there's nothing, there's no real content.
They're selling
there.
Space.
That's really it. It's just nothing but ad pages. I'm like, you get that in the mail with like coupon books.
Right.
So I really just, I've always been one of those type of people that if I see something, I'm not just going to complain about it. I'll see what I can do to maybe raise the bar or fix it. Mm-hmm. So that was the whole purpose of even doing the magazine, because I felt like it was a void. But do people read? I think people are starting to appreciate it a little bit more. I think the way they're getting it is, of course, different. Everything is digital now. And I mean, we put the magazine out digitally as well, but it was hard copies. I think people appreciate the hard copies of it. But I think it is starting to get more. I think it's starting to come back around more, that people are starting to read a little bit more now. I mean, I like to read. There was a big period of my time of life that I didn't really just appreciate reading. But as I've slowed down a little bit more, I do appreciate reading a nice book. So I have several books that I'm gearing up to read. I just I finish one, start on the next.
What's your preference, fiction, nonfiction?
I like books about strategy and biographies.
Okay.
Those are my go-tos.
Okay. Well, strategy, I think, is a wonderful thing. When I start to read biographies, I have to wonder who wrote them and what was the purpose in the writing.
Well, autobiographies, let me correct that. I like it where the person actually had input in their own story.
Yeah, well,
that was a misquote on me.
No problem. So, with all of the things that you have your hand in, how is Laugh Now, Laugh Later doing with Mad Game Entertainment?
It did good. We wrapped up our 7th season last year, and that came out at the end of 2018. This year, I'm letting it take a hiatus this year, though.
Okay.
To do other things. So there was a film project that I was working on before the flood hit, and in 2016. And I'm just kind of getting back to doing that.
Okay.
We're doing Kenyatta Show connections. And then later on this year, I'm going to be doing another TV show with a comedian, which I'm not going to say yet. It's not a finalized deal. It's just we want to have a proper rollout. So I don't want to spill the beans just yet because it's coming out later on.
Sure.
But that's what I'm kind of focused on this year.
Okay. Your mom is also involved in the creative arts and in the dramatic arts and plays and things of that sort. Do you all collaborate, or are your works separate?
It's kind of have to. I really have a choice. I just get calls and, hey, I need you to do this for me. Like,
okay, well, that's just a son doing what his mom asks her to do.
Yeah.
Or asks him to do, I should say. But is there a formalized collaborative arrangement that you and your mother enjoy? Dr. Ava Turner.
She called and take care of this for me.
I understand.
So that I guess it's under the umbrella of collaboration, but yeah, I get calls and do this for me. Oh, okay, Ma. That's kind of how that collaboration goes.
Well, you're a good son. You're a good son.
I try to be.
Over the last year, we have done this podcast, and it was an idea that we came up with, and it started off one way. It started off more as me giving a series of monologues designed to try to develop a theological perspective on current events. It has evolved into something a little bit more than that, and I appreciate your input in the evolution of the podcast. As the person who usually sits behind the camera and observes every single one of these, how do you think the podcast is doing?
I think it's tracking very well.
And by the way, this is an online assessment. I didn't ask him this question ahead of time. He didn't know he was going to get asked that question.
No, I didn't. I think it's tracking pretty well on both YouTube and on iTunes. The numbers continue to grow. And there's always it's always a surprise to me when I go back and I look at the analytical report, and it's like people in Australia listening. We just had 10 listeners in Australia this week. I'll look and I'll see on one day it had 60 downloads. Mm-hmm. And it's not just one particular episode. It's just all over the place. It's they went back and checked out this one and that one. So I think the fact that we've been able to produce so much content, it gives people kind of an option, almost like a Netflix option, where they can go back and they can, I guess, binge them. Mm-hmm. Where I guess they're listening to them back to back to back, and it's not even the newest one. They'll go back and reach and get one from months ago. Mm-hmm. So that's the funny thing that I see happening. But I do think people are appreciating it, and I think with anything, it's just it's just catching on more and more the more times that we do it. And then even with, I really saw an uptick of it due to your idea of putting out content every day. So not only having the interviews with people, but also Tuesday through Friday having highlights from the worship service and the Bible study. I saw a big influx of downloads after we started doing that.
Okay.
So that showed that people really just appreciate new content and different content, because the Bible study is different from the worship service, and the worship service is different from the actual podcast where you actually have someone on. So I think that they have different options, and it's just flourished.
So from your perspective, that was a quantitative analysis in a qualitative way. And you have been here for every single one. It's funny when I invite people in and they come in, first question I ask just to try to get them comfortable, have you listened to the podcast? And when I get a 2-second pause before they go, yeah, I usually take that to mean, no, I haven't listened to anything. but they're trying to be polite, and I understand that. But you have been here for every single one of these podcasts. From a qualitative standpoint, how do you think we're doing, and what could we do to make it better, make it more relevant? But remember, the whole idea behind this was to reach a different audience from what we see on a Sunday morning or on a Wednesday for Bible study, to reach out into the community and beyond the community and share what we hope are relevant thoughts on current events and things that are taking place, and how they affect us as Christians, specifically as African Americans, as residents of this community, as residents in the South, things of that sort. From a qualitative standpoint, how do you think we're doing?
I think we're on the right track. There are different things that I do kind of envision doing, and as far as just having different type of guests on, and not so much as that their standards or anything are different from us, but just different in general, just completely 180. I would love to have an atheist come on and talk, simply because I think that conversation is productive. To have a believer, someone who promotes believing in Christ and believing in God, to discuss that with an atheist. And I think people would appreciate that conversation on both ends, and maybe the atheist may walk away with something different. And it's not, you never come across like you're trying to convert anyone, or
right.
you're trying to get them to, make sure you come to church. You're
right.
not pushing it. I think that in our society, these conversations haven't happened. It's been, I'm on this side, I'm on that side, and the sides never meet. The sides never have any dialogue. And I think it bleeds into insults. Atheists, a lot of atheists that I've seen in the public eye, they always have this very snobbish way that they speak about people who believe. It's almost like, oh my gosh, you believe in that,
right?
Really,
right?
It's very, they have a very, I'm looking down on you kind of thing. Believers, we've had this thing where it's like, don't talk to them, they're evil, you'll go to hell. So, it's almost like, don't come in contact with them.
You're going to hell!
Yeah, like it's
when
like,
you said that immediately came to my mind. You're going to hell!
Yeah, they don't have they're not diseased.
Yeah.
You come in contact with them like, oh, I don't believe in God no more. I talked to an atheist today. So yeah. I would love to have someone like that. I would love to have, maybe a Muslim on, or maybe, an Orthodox Jew.
Shiloh was a part of the Federation, well, it's not called the Federation of Churches and Synagogues, the Interfaith Federation. In fact, I have agreed to serve on the board for 2019, the position that I was in several years ago. And I thought about the fact that it would be good to have people of different faiths to come on and utilize this platform as a means of sharing with the community, not just our differences in belief, but the commonality of our belief. And so I've had thoughts in that same direction. But that's something that we need to work on for 2019.
Yeah, and you and I have had conversations even about just media in general,
right? And
how we have to start using whatever platform we have to start trying to control our narrative. I think for too long, especially with black people in this country, we've allowed ourselves to be defined, and we don't define. And it's not that intelligent enough to define ourselves.
Right.
We haven't had the platforms to define ourselves. All the media companies, all the television stations, they're not owned by anybody who looks like us.
That's correct.
They're owned by other people, and we've allowed ourselves to be defined. And we have to start taking that power back and defining ourselves through whatever platform we have. So, the internet is great. That now we don't need $1 billion and a big satellite in the back and get satellites in space.
Right.
Sirius X. We don't have to do that. We can literally just upload our content to YouTube and people can get it that way.
Yes.
Or through iTunes, and it's global. It's all around the world.
Yes.
So I think that's the thing that we really have to start getting into is just, that's why I'm proud of the podcast, because it's another platform that we use to help define the narrative for us.
Mm-hmm. Over the last year, what is your thinking with regard to community events? We are now 2 years into the Donald Trump experiment, which is a nice way of saying his first term as president. We are well into Mayor Sharon Weston Broom's first term as mayor-president of East Baton Rouge Parish. Governor John Bel Edwards of Louisiana is going to be seeking re-election later this year. That's our national president, our state governor, our local mayor. As a young man, 34, 35 years old, what are your thoughts about where we are as African Americans in relationship with government, local, state, national government?
My thoughts on that are it could actually seem slightly bleak, and that's only because I'm not a surface person. True, I think Louisiana probably has the most judges out of every state that are black. And that was even thanks, if you go back to Governor Edwin Edwards, that started happening under his administration, where more and more black judges were appointed to these different positions. I don't think that it's really changed the landscape that much, because these are surface positions. They're still answering to certain people. I think the way to change the landscape is, and it's a quote that I love, you're either at the table or on the menu. And I think that a lot of our elected officials that even look like us, they're keeping us on the menu. They're not getting a place at the table. Mm-hmm. And it's evident with the policies that are constantly passing, with laws that are in effect. How does that happen? And you have all of these elected officials that look just like us. That's because where's the real power at? There's power behind that cosmetic change. We've made a big cosmetic change in America, but we haven't changed the underworkings of it. And that's where the issue is. So it's either you're at the table or you're on the menu. And we have a lot of people that I feel personally continues to perpetuate this thing and keep us on the menu and not at the table.
Do you think that the reason why this is because there's an economics component that has not balanced out over the span of time that we've started to see? Let's just use a number over the last 50 years, which is before you were born. But there's still an imbalance in economics with regard to African American wealth versus Caucasian wealth in this country, in this state, in this parish. And as long as that imbalance exists, then you're going to continue to have these kinds of problems. That's my perspective. I'm asking, do you share that point of view?
No, it's absolutely true. It's definitely based on economics, and when I say people of that have positions that when they speak, millions of people hear their voice. I use a prime example. I use him as an example. Hope that's not a problem. Look at Minister Farrakhan. Okay, you have someone who in the 90s when I was growing up, I remember he held the Million Man March. And then, what was it, like a couple of years before, what was it, like 2013 or 14 or something like that, he had like a second annual Million Man March. My issue with that is you assembled all of these people. What was the plan? Mm-hmm. Did you do it for cosmetic effect? Did you actually lay out a viable plan of, okay, we're going to group our resources together. Individually, we don't have a lot of resources. We don't, but let's develop our own network of power. If you look at other ethnicities that come to this country, and granted, yes, we've had laws against us. We've had certain battles that other cultures,
no other race or ethnicity
in this country has ever had to face. Yeah. Trust me, I completely understand. I'm not skating over that. But what I'm saying is our mentality towards each other has to change, where we get together and we group our resources together and try to change it for later. If you look at Asian people, if you look at Middle Eastern people, when they come over, they start a business, and it'll be the whole family and they're working together, and they build something, and they build enough money and enough resources where they send their children to go be lawyers and doctors. Now they're creating a network of power, because now, okay, my son is a doctor, he can do this. My other son is a lawyer, he can do this. My daughter, is an accountant for this. You're spreading your people out, because now you develop resources, you got like a foundation, and you spread your people out, and now you're creating a network of power. I know every black person can relate to this. They've been on their job and they've heard a white coworker say, I don't need this job, I can always go work for my uncle in Idaho doing whatever. Black people, we don't say that.
No.
So when are we going to start, we have to patronize our own people. We have to develop our own business. It has to be some kind of entrepreneurship to where we know we can count on each other. I've heard this statement before too, and I've only heard it within us. Don't hire your friends and family. But everybody else is hiring their friends and family. Why is that only, going through our culture where we feel like we can't hire our friends and family because, they ain't gonna work right? But everybody else is doing it.
There is an inherent mistrust that exists within the African American community that is difficult to dispel and difficult to overcome, and is constantly reinforced whenever you have a negative experience hiring friends and family. One of the chief complaints that I have is that as professionals, African Americans only get one shot. If you go to an African American doctor and have a bad experience, no other African American doctor is going to get your business. Same thing is true with an African American lawyer. Same thing is true with an African American accountant. If that sounds hyperbolic, it's only slightly so. We will give others 2 chances, 3 chances, 4 chances, 10 chances. But when it comes to one of us, one who looks like us, one who's had an experience similar to ours, they get one shot. And if they fail, if they are corrupt, if they are inexperienced, if it does not work out to our satisfaction, the word on the street to everyone who we can get to listen to us is, don't go there. Don't trust those people. They can't do what you need to get done. How do we overcome that kind of that's not others saying that about us. That's us saying that about ourselves.
Well, it's a two-way street with that. One, the person that's in business, you have to keep showing up and try to do the best that you can. And when people see that, eventually you're going to do better if you keep putting forth the best effort. But if you come into your business and you're lackadaisical about it, then people are very warranted to say this about you. But if they come in and, if the first time I come in and the service wasn't that good, but at least the food was good, you got to have some kind of bright spot there.
Right.
So if I come into a restaurant, the service is horrible, but the food was good,
right,
I'm willing to give you another chance, because if you're just getting started, you may not have been able to hire the proper staff that you want. There's a restaurant right here, black-owned, in Baton Rouge, and when they first started, service was horrible. I gave them 3 more chances after that. And eventually they got it right, and it became my favorite restaurant, and I would go there on a regular basis. Because I said, me being an entrepreneur myself, I know how it is when you're first starting. You don't have everything. You know, you may not have all your resources, but there's never a perfect time to just start. You got to just start.
Right.
There's no, you know, there is no, well, the moon is going to line up with the stars and this is the perfect time to start. Now, it's never going to be like that.
Right.
So I applaud anybody who starts a business. And I remember going, I mean, it was 2-3 times. It was just like, oh my God, the service is horrible. At least the food is good. But man, I had to wait, 45 minutes for my plate.
Yeah.
And I would still tell other people, make sure you go check them out. Make sure you go check them out. Because if we continue to still, despite that, if we can look past that a little bit, give them a little time, they'll get on their feet and they'll be head and shoulders with everybody else. So, but they kept at least having good food. Now, if I go there and the service bad and your food bad, then,
yeah,
I can't. But at least the food was good, and that kept me saying, okay, I'm gonna, I might wait a couple of weeks before, let me see if they staff up a little bit better this time.
Right.
Go again. I see some improvement. Go again. I see a little bit more improvement. Went to the 4th time. Everything was clicking like it should have been clicking. Okay, that's what we have to have a little bit more patience, because we're coming from a background to where, maybe he couldn't get a $50,000 loan to start his business. He just started with whatever he had.
Right.
We got to be a little bit more patient with our people, but our people also have to show improve with their business.
I think that's a valid point. The spirit of entrepreneurship within our community, I find, is high. There are a lot of people who want to be entrepreneurs. They want to be their own bosses. They want to have more control over their financial futures. But the risk that's involved is sometimes prohibitive to their following their aspiration. Entrepreneurs, for the most part, aren't going to have insurance, aren't going to have a retirement program. It's going to be a long time before you see a 6-figure income, because everything that you do has to be reinvested back into the business in order to make it survive. And as a result, I think that there are a lot of people who have who are motivated and interested about becoming entrepreneurs, but simply aren't in a position where they feel like they can take that risk. And that's where financial support becomes so important. A lot of, I don't think that kind of fear is unique to the African American community. I think that people of all races suffer the same fears, they have the same concerns. But I do find that people of a different hue have different resources from which they can get their investment dollars than we do. And unless and until African Americans who have made it are willing to reinvest in their community by investing in the entrepreneurship ideas of those who are coming behind us, then we're going to continue to have these problems.
I agree, and I mean, that's when Mitt Romney was running for president. That's what made him seem so out of touch. He said, "Oh, just go to your parents and ask them for a loan." Everybody don't have that.
That's
what are
correct.
you talking about? You was so out of touch. But I mean, and that's what I even meant with people who are in positions of power where their voice speaks volumes and people can hear them. Put out an actual viable plan. If you look at the football player Marshawn Lynch, he's buying up property in Oakland. So this is what you mean when you say the person that did make it, when you have disposable income like that, reinvest it in the place that you came from.
Right.
If you're not doing that, then you're being selfish at this point. Because you have to realize it is bigger than you. Just because you made it, that doesn't mean anything, because if you're the only one there, you're still on an island by yourself. And an island is vulnerable to attack. So the people who, all of our high-powered doctors and lawyers that really made it and they made a name for themselves.
And professional athletes.
Professional
let's not
athletes
leave
as
them
well.
out. Yeah.
No, let's by no means let's not leave them out. But when you've made it and you have that disposable income, if it's not going to hurt you, which it's not, reinvest into people. They can't go get a bank loan, but if you even when the point that I made earlier, where the friends and family thing. yeah, that's true. If you know you got a relative or a friend that's not going to do right, then by no means hire them. But you have friends who you know who are responsible.
Right.
You have family who you know will be there and will be diligent and will work hard for the greater good of the company. You know that. So that rule is, to me, the rule needs to be explained more. Mm-hmm. Certain friends and family don't do business with, because we all got friends and family that I got friends right now. I wouldn't. Yeah. There was no way I'd bring them around.
We've all got an Uncle Junior.
Yes.
Uncle Junior ain't gonna get along.
No, we know what Uncle Junior gonna do.
I understand.
But we have to have a bigger picture in mind, that we have to start controlling our own stuff, because if we don't, then we're forever going to be on the menu. When you have people like I brought them up earlier, Farrakhan, you assembled 1 million people and you didn't put out a viable plan. Mm-hmm. It's just a bunch of puff. It's just a bunch of, it ain't right. Well, that's okay, Captain Obvious. I get it. I don't need you to tell me it's not right. I got 2 eyes and 2 ears. I can see and hear it for myself. Yeah. What are we doing about it, though? What happens after that? He assembled all them people on a Sunday, and on Monday they went back to work. Yeah. And did what? Yeah. We're just going to go back. Okay, we'll go back to my 9 to 5 now. Yeah. These are the people who I feel like are kind of an issue for us. Mm-hmm. That, you know, every time something happens, they'll go get the usual suspects. You know, even on national news, they'll go get Jesse Jackson. Where's the viable plan? Mm-hmm. Can you point to something that you've actually made a change with? Mm-hmm. Or have you just been in the public eye for 40 years occupying space? Well, and I hope I don't offend anybody by that.
Well, and it's not intended to be offensive to anyone. I want to be clear about that. But I do think that we have to acknowledge the fact that some people are meant to play different roles. Mm-hmm. It's like on a basketball team, a traditional basketball team. You got 5 players out there on the court. Different players are expected to do different things. The point guard is expected to be the quarterback of the team, and he calls the offense, and he holds the ball. He handles the ball more than anybody else. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be the top scorer. You've got somebody else who does that. So different people have different roles. I don't have a problem with acknowledging that Minister Farrakhan or Reverend Jackson, who have voices and have a history where a segment of the community will listen to them, and they also have their share of critics out there. But they are able to draw people to come and hear. I do agree with you that on the back end of drawing them in, there needs to be a plan. But I don't necessarily think that the plan has to come from Minister Farrakhan or Reverend Jackson, because they don't have the resources either. Those are not the guys with the resources. The guys with the resources are the doctors, the lawyers, the architects, the accountants who have been successful. God has blessed them in their chosen professions. They've made a wealth of money, and they have the opportunity to give back. Now, who are you, Fred Jeff Smith, to tell other people what to do with their hard-earned money? I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm only trying to tell you that if it's not done, then we're going to continue to have the same problems that we have. And also, in fairness, there are people in this community who have been successful, who are African American, who are giving back to their community. I don't want to make it sound like no one is doing that. It's simply not enough of them that are doing that.
Well, and I mean, and again, like, I'm not trying to just pick on Farrakhan and Jesse Jackson. I'm really not. But I even look at, okay, you don't have the audience that they have, but I feel like you do more. You actually put out viable statements, viable plans of how can we move our people forward. So you don't have millions of people who know your name, but the people that do know your name know where you stand, and they know that you're coming up with viable plans to help push us forward. So all I'm saying is, if you can do it with the number of people that you have listening to you, they can do it. Yeah. That's all I'm pointing out. But it's not well, you've been there for 40 years, because a lot of things that get tossed around too is, well, you've had your time. By no means am I saying that, because I feel like if you're doing good, I don't care how long you're occupying a position. If you're doing something, stay on there for as long as you got breath in your lungs. Yeah. So it's not about that either, because I've heard that argument before too, and I think it's completely stupid.
Yeah.
But I'm saying with what you have, if you have, I don't know how many people hear you on a weekly basis, because it's not just people who come to Shiloh, but it's people who listen to you on the radio, people who see you on TV, people who hear the podcast. Every time you have an opportunity, every time there's a microphone in front of your face, you're putting out viable plans. I don't know how many people hear you. I don't know how many people can see you. Some I kind of know, but not. But you know, it's up and down. But they have millions of people that hear them, and I never hear them put out any viable plans.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I'm saying. If they're not going to do it, they need to use their platform and put someone up there who does have a viable plan to talk on their behalf.
Yeah.
So that's my only gripe with them.
Do you know any black Republicans?
I know one that goes here. That's the only one I know.
I do too. But I'm turning the page back slightly. The reason why I'm asking that question is because there are some who believe that every black person is ipso facto a member of the Democratic Party, and ipso facto a progressive, ipso facto a liberal, and that simply ain't so.
No, we're not monolithic.
We are not monolithic, and it is somewhat shocking when people find out that we are not monolithic. I happen to know not just the one Republican that you and I both know here, but I have members of my family who are African American and who are Republican and who believe not necessarily in President Trump, but believe in the Republican agenda, which they see as being smaller government, pro-business, pro-military. So in this current environment, and as we're sitting here taping this, we are on day 34, I believe, of the federal government shutdown, 800,000 people who are still out of work, and the collateral businesses that feed off of those 800,000 and off of the government entities that are now closed, suffering tremendously. And from my perspective, this is a government shutdown of the Republican Party's making, and it is a government shutdown that the Republican Party could change in a moment. It wouldn't take a day. It wouldn't take an hour. It could be changed, and people could be put back to work right now if they wanted to. I was just curious if in your interactions with African Americans who happen to be Republican, they have offered to you an opinion, a thought, a belief system that justifies what is currently taking place, the level of unnecessary suffering. Everybody suffers to some extent, but the level of unnecessary suffering that is taking place in this country.
It's funny because, not funny, ha-ha, like funny, ironic. But a lot of black people I know are financial conservatives, and they're Democrats by society.
Right.
And
social liberals. Yeah.
So it's funny because they'll say, hey, I'm with tax cuts, but I'm not with that.
Right.
And that's what, I really feel like there needs to be more than a two-party system. Mm-hmm. I think the two-party system is what's really kind of ripped the country apart. Mm-hmm. It's Crips and Bloods. That's what it is. And coincidentally, it's red and blue, too.
Right.
I think that's kind of ironic, too.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah,
it's straight up gang mentality right now as far as the political party is set up. And I think that there needs to be a viable third or maybe even viable fourth party where there's more of an option, there's more of a choice. I think we've given the political process a monopoly to just two parties, where it's like, okay, you either got to be here or there. And I don't think a lot of people are not just hardline conservative on every issue. There are not a lot of people who are hardline liberal on every issue either. And it's like, but you're forced to either pick a side. The people that I know that lean more conservatively, the only thing they've offered up is that, the same argument is financially, this is what they believe. Mm-hmm. They're just not with all of that. I know some white Republicans who are not with that hard line right, just all the way conservative Tea Party mentality. They're not with that at all. I recall even when I was doing some work with a government agency for media, and the guy, I won't mention his name, but the guy, I mentioned this other person's name, Woody Jenkins was speaking somewhere. And this guy said, okay, I'm not going to be there.
I understand that.
And they're both Republicans.
Right.
And he says, I can't be seen in a room with him because he's a different type of Republican than I am.
Most assuredly.
And when he said it, at first it kind of went over my head because I'm like, all of y'all are Republicans. No. He's like, no. He's way different than me. He's way different than me. And that was, he would not go in, he was an invited speaker and everything. He turned it down that day.
Right.
So it's funny when you have that because, sometimes I think, I think everybody has their bubbles. I think we think that that side is monolithic as well, and they're actually not.
Yeah. The difference being, and I agree with you, they're not monolithic, but the difference being,
now they benefit monolithically,
and they hang together a little bit more. Even the guy who doesn't side with the Woody Jenkins form of conservative,
but he's not going to publicly come out and say
he's not going to say that, and he's not going to vote for a Democrat either.
No, he told me that
that's not going
in
to
a
happen.
side room.
Right.
He didn't come out and say, but I'm staunchly against that guy.
But when you hear what I consider to be idiotic comments, like Representative Scalise saying the other day that Speaker Pelosi is the reason why there's not more minority membership in the United States Congress. I don't know what form of logic gets you to the place where you say the Democratic Speaker of the House, who is a representative of a district in California, is so powerful that she and her ilk are responsible for a paucity of minority leadership in the Republican Party. What form of thinking allows that to make sense to you? That you say this in front of a microphone, in front of a worldwide audience.
And someone, again, media, we got to do a better job, media. Whoever was interviewing them should have said, and what have you personally done then to change to bring in more minorities within the Republican Party then? We got to stop allowing people to just say stuff and not call them on it and not say, no, you can't just say that. That's the whole purpose. That's the whole reason why we have 45 up saying that, the government shutdown that's on Nancy Pelosi. Like, we didn't have a camera in the room when you said, I'm going to shut the government.
I'm going to shut it down. I'm going to own it. It'll be mine. Yes, that's what he said.
To quote the previous president during his debate with Mitt Romney, get the transcript. Like, can we get the transcript? Like, you said these things.
Yes.
You said for 3 years Mexico will pay for the wall. Now you're saying, no, we got to put it in the budget now.
Yeah.
We're not holding anybody to their word anymore. Like, I thought that was isn't that what got the first Bush outed when he said no new taxes?
And
they played that back and back, and it's like, oh, now we got to vote you out now.
But times have changed.
Times have changed tremendously.
Yeah, and it's hard to have productive dialogue, productive conversation with people who have become so tribal.
Crips and Bloods.
And Crips and Bloods. And the problem with that is we're caught in the crossfire. African Americans, by and large, are caught in the crossfire. We are not as economically equipped to deal with these issues. We are not politically strong enough to overcome these issues without help from other groups of people who share our values, and yet we don't want them to become paternalistic, because that's problematic also. And so the quandary for us, I started this whole conversation with local, state, national. The quandary for us is that even though we have a position, and we think that it is both a right and a righteous position. We don't have the efficacy within ourselves to put forward that position in such a way as to generate change. And so it becomes necessary for us to stand on our position and compel others to see things from our point of view. And quite frankly, that becomes fatiguing after a while. That I have to convince you of the righteousness of my position in order for you to affirm my position. I have grown to the point where I get tired of having to do that. I don't want to have to affirm anything to you. I don't care whether you see it my way or not. I know I'm right. I'm going to stand on the rightness of my position. But I also, there's a part of me that says you can take that position if you want to, but it's not going to yield the kind of fruit that you're trying to get because you still don't have the political power, the economic power to make the difference without help from some other folk.
Well, and that's why we have to get to the point where even if and help is always welcome. But we've got to get our mindset to the point where help or no help, we got to start somewhere, and we got to have the vision to see past what's today and what's tomorrow, but what's 10 years from now if we start on this track now. Mm-hmm. And we got to realize, Dr. King said this in one of his last speeches, we can't wait for the government to do this.
Yes.
This is something we have to do on ourselves. We have to assert ourselves in this manner. So even if it's not the immediate change that we want, we have to know that this is going, if we start right now, I might not see it, but if the mindset stays how it is where we're starting now, then future generations will see it, and they won't have to endure what we're enduring now. So, I mean, we have to get back to where, not to endorse segregation, but when segregation was happening, I love history, by the way, too, which you already know that. But during segregation, we were forced to have our own businesses because we couldn't patronize
that is correct.
Other people's businesses. We got to kind of have that mentality again, and not that we're trying to segregate ourselves, but that we're forced to build our own because you're not being fair.
Right.
You're not living up to what the Constitution is saying that you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
We don't have the option to say, I don't need this job because I can go work for my uncle in Idaho.
Right.
But we have to get to that point to where we have that option. And the only way we're going to do that is we got to start somewhere. So a pebble starts small, but it can go into an avalanche. We got to remember that we can create an avalanche. We just got to start with our pebble.
Right. Right. Dr. King also said that we can't depend solely upon leadership that looks like us if they didn't really come from us. Mm-hmm. I've been posting on Facebook for the last couple of weeks. Started with the King holiday, leading up to the King holiday, but I've been going back and rereading Dr. King. I've also been reading a lot of James Cone. I've also been reading a lot of Gardner C. Taylor, and I've taken a quote from each one of them every day and posted it on Facebook. And one of the quotes that I came across of Dr. King was, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it right in front of me, he was saying that we have to be highly suspect of leaders who look like us but weren't positioned by us, but were positioned by others.
Trojan horses.
Trojan horses. Mm-hmm. And I find that is as relevant today, and not just in the political circle. In fact, my concern about that is more in church circles than anything else, where whites have promoted African American leaders within the church, not within their church, but to start their own churches, and they have funded them but they've also fed them the message that they're going to give to their community. And by the millions, not by the thousands, by the millions, we have flocked to those churches to hear a message that comes out of a black person's mouth, but is not a black person's message.
Yeah.
And the corruption and the divisiveness that comes as a result of that. And it's harm that will take generations to undo.
Yeah, and it's not a foreign concept. If you know, for anyone listening or watching, if you study history, America itself has a history of going around the world, assassinate one leader, and put in place who we want to then distribute our message of assimilation to how we think, and that way we weed out all the quote unquote radicals. Well, you can do that on a smaller scale, like you said, with the churches. You have someone and they hand pick who they want to distribute a message to the masses.
Right.
So it's not a foreign concept for me. It didn't even make me flinch when you said it, because I expect it. And when you, even if you look at certain people and the way they talk, you can tell they're not authentic. They're a puppet that was placed there to keep us in line. And I'm always very weary of certain people. And you and I have talked, extensively about. I try not to be even a conspiracy theorist, but I know I look at certain people and I'm like, you're a Trojan horse. I just know it.
No. If
I can just prove it, but I don't have any hard evidence, but I just know it's true.
Well, here's the thing for me, and I don't have the time or the resources to do the fact fighting that would convince other people. But I'm firmly convinced, if you started off in your living room as a church in 2010, and by 2012 you got 4,000 people and you got a $34 million facility that the Lord blessed you with. That didn't just happen by accident.
Nah, that was completely by design.
That happened because somebody out there pumped your ministry with money so that you would promote their message, and more important, you would not promote the actual gospel. What Cone focuses on more and more and more is the illegitimacy of the gospel that goes forth. This idea that social justice is somehow antithetical to the gospel message of Jesus Christ. It tells me you know nothing about social justice, you know nothing about the gospel, you know nothing about Jesus, because Jesus promoted a social justice gospel. And to hear black folk stand up and say, that's not the true gospel, that's not the genuine message of Jesus Christ, that's not Jesus' message of love. No, doggone it, that is Jesus' message of love. If you love folk, then you're going to feed them. If you love folk, then you're going to clothe them. If you love folk, you're going to make sure that they have shelter. If you love folk, you're going to make sure that they have all of the creature comforts that everybody else needs. Not luxury, not prosperity, that they have all of the creature comforts that every other person in this society needs and has. And if you don't love them, then you'll act like those things aren't important.
Yeah.
Just as long as you know that Jesus is your Savior and that when you die, you're going to go to heaven. It's a joke.
Yeah.
And yet it goes on constantly. And we constantly fall for it until they become useless, and then they're dropped like a hot rock, and they go and get somebody else to do the same thing all over again.
Yeah, it goes back to the point I made earlier about, we have to stop allowing ourselves to be defined by other people, and that's a way that they define our narrative is, all right, they go and look, eeny, meeny, miny, black person, you, come over here. I'm going to put this battery in your back.
Yeah.
And you go out there and now you say this, and this. I mean, we saw this with Nat Turner.
Right.
They started off giving him certain scriptures to read. Slaves, make sure you mind your masters. So this is an old trick.
Yeah.
And we have to stop falling for this trick. If they did this 300 years ago and they're still running the same play, this is Lucy with the football. We got to stop being Charlie Brown at this point.
Yes.
And it's going to take, people standing up and paying attention and saying, okay, what's really authentic? I use that example. I said, at least when you have a mic in front of you, you are speaking viable plans. And I think I even posted about this on Facebook. I said, if you see a quote unquote leader or a preacher or a community leader or an activist, and they have a mic in their hands, and they're not saying anything viable, they're just talking about this wonderful world where it's going to be hand in hand, and that's a Disney movie.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the realness of it right now, the situation on the ground right now.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, in heaven, black and white, which I've heard you talk about that. It's not even going to be race in heaven.
That's correct.
So if they're talking about that, then they're lying to you.
Yes.
And let's not use falsehoods anymore. They're lying to you.
Yes, they are.
L-I-E.
Yes.
It's a lie, not a falsehood. I don't even know what a falsehood is. I know what a lie is.
Yes.
And that sounds like a lie.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. It is a lie. When they tell you, when I look out across this audience and I see black and white and yellow, that's the way heaven's going to be. Have you read your Bible? There is no flesh and blood in heaven. Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. So it's not about that. It's about how one human being treats another. Mm-hmm. The love that you are supposed to portray is revealed in your treatment of one another. And so I grow very tired of people who say they love me, but treat me in a way that shows that they have no love for me at all. Mm-hmm. And it's especially disheartening when that comes from people who look like me.
Trojan horses.
Trojan horses.
That's what they are.
The other day, Reverend Joel Stockstill of Bethany Church put out a tweet on his Twitter account that included a video from some black academic from a place called Prager University that suggested that black leadership only enriches the black leader, but does not enrich the black community. I watched the video ad nauseum. I saw some of the responses that came back. I'll give him credit. To me, Gary Chambers gave a beautiful, intelligent, thoughtful response to it that called out all of the ridiculousness of that tweet and everything that was in it. But the troubling thing to me is that this is not the first time that this kind of dismissive attitude towards African American leadership has come out of Bethany Church. This is not the first time that it has come out of Reverend Stockstill. This is not the first time that it has come from that community. And yet a large contingent, I don't know the actual percentage, but a large contingent of those who attend Bethany Church are African American people. They are being preached to, they are being taught, they are being led in worship by people who have a dismissive attitude toward you as a race, toward African American leadership, which they see as incompetent and as corrupt, and yet we continue to support that kind of ignorance, that kind of meanness, that kind of divisiveness, that kind of strategic effort to dismantle African American leadership within our community, and we support it and we defend it.
Well, let's just call a spade a spade. I mean, it's in their best interest. When I was younger, my dad always told me, if you want to find the solution to the problem, follow the money trail. Mm-hmm. So it's in their best interest if I can hold on to this big black contingent that I have coming to my church every week, giving me money. And if I paint this picture like, you come here and everything is just great, and over there, see, they're talking about negative stuff, racism, and shudder the thought. That's, it's in their best interest to promote this and to say, no, over here it's fine. And you're sitting right next to somebody who probably votes against your interest every day. They don't share your same your same struggle. They don't even take up your plight.
And if they're poor, they're not only voting against your interest, they're voting against their own.
Yeah.
This current administration is not just against people of color. It's against people without wealth.
Well, see, white people need their own NAACP to show them that, you're being led astray. It's on your backs as well that this big wealthy contingent over here stays wealthy, and they stepping on your back on your back as well. They need their own NAACP.
Yeah,
they really do.
It is just troubling to me that we continue to not only give our physical support, our financial support, but we will actually defend these individuals and these entities that are working against our own interest.
Well, I like to challenge any black person who attends these predominantly white churches that they never speak on your behalf. When things happen, it's just like when you're at work. You can't speak your mind, can you?
Right.
Really look into yourself and say, how comfortable am I here? Can I talk about, if you're a black male, don't tell me you've never been stopped by the police or followed or anything like that. Can I talk to anybody here that don't look like me, and will they understand? And will they be just as outraged about it as I am? And why is it that they don't, when something happens to someone who looks like me, they're quiet? Really look into yourself and then look in the mirror and tell me what you feel.
Yeah.
That's what I would like to challenge any black person that goes there.
Good points. Good points. You're a husband. You reside in this community. At some point, I imagine that you and your beautiful wife are going to become parents, and you're going to have a family. I asked this question of everyone. I probably asked this question of you last time you were on and don't remember whether or not I did. So I'm going to ask you again. Would you like to raise your family in the Baton Rouge community, or do you see this, even though you were born and raised here, do you see this as a stopping point along the way for you to go someplace else?
Well, I wasn't born here. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay.
Yeah, I was born in Memphis. But this is my home, and I would love to keep this as my foundation. That's my mindset. But I also realize that change can't happen if the change makers are not here. So if I have to be a change maker to make it happen, then that's where I have to be. So that's my goal, is to make this into the place that it should be. And whatever I can do to help that change along the way, that's what I plan on doing. So I do plan on being here.
Good. It's to Shiloh's benefit that you are here. It's to my personal benefit that you are here. One of the things that I have appreciated in the time that we have worked together, which is now getting on towards 6 years, is I have watched you bring in with you, as a part of your group, as you conduct your ministry here at the church. You have brought people into the Shiloh family, many of whom have become members of Shiloh. They came to work with you to staff the audio-video ministry of the church, to staff the sound ministry of the church, and things of that sort. But many of them have become members of the church. And what I have seen happen as a result of you at the hub, you at the center, is that you have surrounded yourself with some very talented people who have then brought their talents with them to the Shiloh family, and Shiloh has been blessed as a result. My question to you about that is, do you see that as being the most important aspect, the most beneficial aspect of your own entrepreneurship? Take it away from the evangelism aspect, because it is evangelical, but I want to look at it from the standpoint of the fact that you are your own entrepreneur. You have your own entertainment company, and many of these people who have come with you to Shiloh are people who you surrounded yourself with as a part of Mad Game Entertainment. You have given these people jobs. You have given these people opportunities to flesh out their talents and their abilities, to discover what their talents and abilities may be. We were talking about one of your support staff before we started taping, and how you have watched them develop in a very brief period of time when given the opportunity to do that. Do you see that as one of the most beneficial, one of the most important aspects of your entrepreneurship?
Absolutely, because if I can make everyone else around me better, then that's the best insurance policy in the world. Because if I happen to come on hard times or stumble, if I've been able to empower them to where, okay, now they can take care of themselves and other people, then they can extend that same courtesy back to me. And I'm not doing it like in my mind, like, in 10 years, I'm not like the Godfather, like, one day, I'm gonna call on you for a favor. That's not in my head, but that's just how I look at it, is that if you invest in people, people will take care of you as well. One thing that was always impressive about me is, you always say, this is it for me. And the people take care of you because you're doing your part in what you're supposed to do.
Right.
So I feel like if I'm being a positive impact on someone else and they're getting some out of it, and then they also in turn are able to empower themselves financially and spiritually, then they can help me along the way if I happen to fall or stumble or something happens to me. But also, it's also me really believing that it isn't about me. I want to be able to empower people with knowledge so that, say something does happen to me, it don't stop. I don't want to, if I get sick or, if God forbid I died, at an unforeseen age, you're not, Shiloh or anything else that I have anything to do with is not sitting around saying, okay, what we gonna do now? He was the only one who knew how to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
But if I've shared that knowledge with other people, it keeps going, and that's what makes a strong front, I believe. If you look at history, when Dr. King was assassinated, a lot of things stopped, and I don't think he planned it for that way.
Right.
But there were people who chose either not to pick up the ball, or they picked up a different ball and went another way.
Right.
And I would like for if anything happened to me, the ball we can still get to the end zone.
Right. Right. One of the big differences, and we're moving toward a close. That's a preacher phrase. As I move toward a close, one of the things that I appreciate about the church, about a church like Shiloh, and many of the African American churches in our community, is that there is a longevity attached to the church. Shiloh is 146 years old, and be 147 years old at the midpoint of this year, around August of this year. And we are not the oldest African American church in this community. Mount Zion is older than us by some 10 to 12 years. New Prospect Baptist Church, I believe, is older than we are. But you have any number of churches that are either beyond the century mark or approaching the century mark in age. And when you think about entities that are uniquely African American, that are singularly African American, there are very few that have the longevity as the African American church, not just Baptist, but the African American church of whatever denomination that you happen to be a part of. As a result of that, not only are we hubs of spiritual value and spiritual promoting spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs, we are also the economic hub of the African American community. Still, in the year 2017, generally speaking, the only businesses that black folk own are the black church and the black funeral home. Just about every other business is gone. Black grocery stores, black department stores, any of those things, they're gone. And what we have are the black funeral home and the black church. And I see both of those as being under attack. There is a resilience that exists within those entities that have allowed them to survive the attacks that have come against them. But it does not change the fact that we're being constantly attacked, and we have to constantly reassess and determine how we can best respond in order to maintain our efficacy and our viability in an ever-changing community. The attacks are not always coming from the outside. Quite often, there are problems that exist from within. We have an ever shrinking group of people with succeeding generations that still come to the church, or that still consider the church to be a viable part of their everyday life. And that's something that we need to struggle with. We need to come together and talk about. I think too little conversation is being held among us about things of that sort. I'm saying all of that to say, as someone who is a part of the African American church and is an entrepreneur within this community, what is it that you see that we can do to mutually benefit one another, black entrepreneur, black church, in order to raise our efficacy within our community?
I think something that we could do is show people that they both work hand in hand. One hand wash the other, both hands wash the face. And the face being the black community, that we both need to wash the face. We could do things like let's try to incorporate more entrepreneurs into how we do and build our own network of power. Mm-hmm. And it starts with the hubs that we have. Like you said, the main hubs are the Black Funeral Home and the Black Church. Well, those are the hubs. Now we have to grow from that. So just within the church, you'll find there's a network of power just within the church. And Shiloh, I have to commend them, because Shiloh, I think, publishes, every year, every 2 years, their own directory of businesses of people who are in the church. And right. You can scroll through there. You can find everything from a nutritionist to a mechanic to someone to fix your AC, someone to, build you a house, contractors. Everything is listed in there. We just have to do more collaboration, even between churches. Mm-hmm. It might be, maybe a directory between 3 churches. Or maybe between 3 churches, the churches maybe say, okay, let's be our own investment group and invest in our, in these young entrepreneurs. We got to vet them, make sure, they're qualified, make sure they have their game plan, just like a bank would do, except unlike the bank, we're going to personally be involved in their growth and help them get their business off the ground to where it's viable, because that's going to invest back into the community that's investing into the church. Mm-hmm. I think that's the thing that I see. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to sound like, it's just a simple thing. It's a process. Right. It's something that, it's not something that you can just do a Thanos snap and boom, right. It's there. But it starts with the pebble. Yeah. So we can make the avalanche. Yeah. That's how I see it. The tangibles have to be there, but also the intangibles. The tangibles primarily being a strategic plan. You were talking about strategy earlier, and the economic resources to make it happen. The intangibles have to do with trust and collaboration. Mm-hmm. And until we can make a better, make some improvement in both those areas, we're going to continue to struggle in these things. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your serving as our guest today. I appreciate the work that you do for Shiloh, and I wish you nothing but continued success in what you're doing. He's not the only entrepreneur in his family. His wife is also an entrepreneur. His mother is also an entrepreneur. I'm assuming your dad is also an entrepreneur. So he comes from a family of entrepreneurs. And I'm very grateful that your entrepreneurship reveals itself in Shiloh in such a wonderful way. Thank you for being here. All right.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for viewing. We'll be back next time.